Now for my test vehicle, it is going to be tubular steel. So you see the air channel in the door? So it's exactly the same as those championship winning Nissans of the 1980s. What's up, people, and welcome back to Project Viper GTP, writing the chapter for the Viper story that never got to happen. Of course, I was a huge fan of IMSA GTP racing in the 1980s, as well as Group C, and then also WSC racing in the 90s. But Viper never got a prototype car. So I'm going to have fun dreaming and building a car that's going to be absurd, that I'll actually be able to race in the National Autosport Association or NASA's Unlimited class. But as just a note and a big teaser for the future, this is just a test vehicle for me, not my ultimate car. So you guys really should subscribe because this channel is going to get nutty. Anyway, I want to tell you about the body. It is from the Nissan ZX-Turbo molds. Actually came from the factory molds. So it's exactly the same as those championship winning Nissans of the 1980s. And if you want, let's walk around, maybe take a look at the back. So what we're going to do is today we're going to take the body work all apart. I'm going to take it to my friend's place who's making all of the bulkheads for the chassis. Now for my test vehicle, it is going to be tubular steel. Obviously there are chassis, monocoque chassis of composites such as carbon or even aluminum that can be lighter and stiffer, but the beauty of a steel tube frame chassis, it gives me the opportunity to change things and use it as a test mule. And also, frankly, it works better if I just want to bang around on the street with it and have fun. So that's the direction we're going to go with this. So today we're going to take this apart, take it to Chris Ardern's, but I want to tell you guys about the aerodynamics because you're not going to get to see it for a little while. So the first thing you're going to notice is look at how massive this rear spoiler assembly is. And then more so than that, if you come around here and maybe get back a little bit, these wing fences are absolutely enormous. And in the 1980s, there was a time even IndyCar had their wing fences going all the way down to the ground. You could just develop massive downforce because effectively what you're doing is you're closing off the entire rear of the car. So you have a higher, you can create the low pressure back here through these wings. And then of course there's two wings. These are the ones that came right out of the molds for Nissan and what they developed. And I can adjust the angle of attack on this rear one, effectively working like flaps you see on commercial aircraft if you're flying commercially. But, and I hate to do it to the camera guy, come back here and let's look underneath it. So go back just a little bit. Now, a thing here, guys, this car here and here is a lot of space. And that's where you could have massive Venturi tunnels. In fact, so much of the downforce from really spectacular race cars comes from the underbody and the Venturis. But since that's not what you see are the big wings and splitters and all that. Most people think that's where a lot of it comes from. But it really is the Venturi tunnels. Now, the thing about this car, and it being my test vehicle, I'm probably not going to put big Venturi tunnels on it. It'll be some, but when I first run it with just the conventional aerodynamics, the wings and stuff, it's likely to be more flat bottomed, similar to what the WSC race cars were in the 90s, obviously this car being closed cockpit. Now a lot of people are going to be saying, well Casey, if you don't put tunnels on it, it's not a real race car. Durr. I'm like, okay, well shut up, because if you notice this big old PDO shaft, and all this massive area, it gives me room to experiment with a fan car. So yes, kinetic downforce, much like the banned Brabham Formula One race car of, I think, the late 1970s or early 80s, as well as the Chaparral 2J sucker car that was banned. I don't care if racing basically got wussy decades ago. It's time to push the envelope again. Yes, so I am going to test with the under tray, the skirts, and kinetic downforce. Now there's a couple neat ways to do that. One, you make the entire underside of the chassis a big pan with skirts. Problem is when you suck it to the ground, whoa, the suspension has to collapse. And then that gives you a whole funkiness of suspension and such. Or you just hang the entire under tray off the uprights, which basically puts the force into the wheels, and then allowing the suspension to work with the weight of the car and chassis as it normally would in a conventional car with no aero. So in doing that, basically allows you to create such unlimited downforce. Things can get nutty. Just the way I like it. But come here, let's look at the body. So come on up to the front. I want to show you some other interesting aerodynamic aspects of this body and why I'm especially happy to be using it initially. Now, when you look at a lot of race cars, mid-engine ones, let's say of the early 70s, say like the Porsche 917. Porsche 917 was the air-cooled V12 in the back, but it wasn't entirely air-cooled. It was also oil-cooled. And even in that car, it had a radiator opening for its big oil cooler, which is no different than a radiator, just with oil, up in the front. When you look at something like a Lola T70 or a GT40 or about a zillion other cars, or even this IMSA Corvette here, it's got an opening, boom, for cooling in the radiator, and then they direct the air wherever it's gonna go. Not in this car. The radiators, intercoolers, oil coolers, whatever, go back here, right next to the engine. And what's really neat is these big, first of all, there's no openings for cooling in the front for oil or water. These openings here would be for your brake cooling and brake ducting, which you're gonna need. You feed that to the center of the rotors, cool them as they turn, much like a water pump impeller would. And then actually these louvers are not for cooling so much as the air that flows underneath hits the tire and then has to go somewhere. A lot of that's gonna come up. That relieves pressure from under the wheel wells and helps create downforce or alleviate lift. But see these big openings? There's no radiators or coolers there. Now in my bodywork, we made this panel removable, and if you look at it, it even has an airfoil shape. So what happens is, as the air comes in through here, it's directed through these openings. So I got that removed so you guys can see it. And I want to show you something else. So these were also molded from the original factory molds, this composite, and these are tunnels. So if you look, that shape here matches this shape as well. And this is an air tunnel, and it directs the air around the cockpit, and then come on over here, my camera person, yes! It directs the air from there, on each side, then through the door. Now I taped it up here so it doesn't fall off, but I'm gonna try to lift the door so you guys can see it's hollow. So you see the air channel in the door? Isn't that neat? The door is literally a giant air tunnel. And then from there, this is not how the door opens. It opens like a McLaren F1. It hinges here and here and opens like that, just for all the people who are wondering. So air can flow through the door in the tunnel and then to a radiator placed at an angle right here, or an intercooler or an oil cooler, just right there. Also, there's this intake, so air flowing over the top can then go through here. So you probably mount like an oil cooler right here, something a bit smaller. And then for the big one, maybe your big intercooler if you're doing forced induction, maybe big water radiator on the other side. Now, obviously this bodywork's not sitting on it exactly perfect, so you guys kind of have to blend that together. And then this is an area for the pressure then to alleviate. So some of that potentially will come out the back where the low pressure is above the Venturi tunnels. And then some of that can alleviate right here. So I think that is a really very cool aspect of the design of this body and why I wanted to use it for a test bed so I can make my crazy Viper GTP car and then modify it. And also gives me the opportunity to experiment with fans as a fan car and kinetic downforce. So it's really kind of perfect because if you're running water coolers, oil coolers, or whatever way up at the front, intercoolers doesn't matter, then you'd have all this plumbing to get back here. But if you can run your coolers here, then you've got very little plumbing. And not only that, but you keep that added weight closer to the center, which is much better for the physics of a race car for when you're wanting to change position and go. If you start putting your weight out by the wheels or on the overhangs, it really screws up the ability for the inertia for it to basically change directions quickly. So by having it all in the center, that works out really nicely. Also, these were the original scoops for the rear brakes, and these would attach to the uprights and they would ride with the wheels, so you'd see them move potentially. So I've got those. And then this other snorkel, which is kind of dorky looking. I think it's not really that well sculpted. The original Nissan, it was somewhere back here, and that would go down to the intake for the turbos, it being the smaller displacement V6 with the twin turbos. This, of course, is the mighty Viper V10. It's a big lug, yes, but it's also really cool. Now, this is just a cheap piece of fiberglass molded in where the bodywork is and windows could be. So that's what these are. These are just templates that I have and can use. Just, like I said, a cheap piece of quick fiberglass. So I can get an idea of what shape the polycarbonate has to be for the windows. But in all honesty, I could probably just use straight, flat polycarbonate and just give it the gentle bend and rivet it on. Now, as a note, the original Nissan did not have a provision for any kind of window or panel here. I did it because I'm fancy. And I could also put a rear view little window on the cockpit there to look out the back, although it's going to be worthless with the wings. So mostly I just did it to be fancy. And I want you to all see my Viper engine, yes. Although there's a problem. the Viper engine's so big that with its wet sump pan sitting at the bottom height of the car, it's a little too tall with those intakes. So maybe my opportunity to have to do some interesting things. But with a project like this, building it from scratch, that's just the nature of the beast. Now the other thing too is, when the time comes to experiment with fans out the back, I will most likely do it similar to how the Chaparral 2J was, with the exception, I'm not going to put another engine on it, an ancillary engine. That's a bit much, that's over complex, it's annoying, it's heavy. So what I'm going to be doing is using provisions with shafts from the big Viper engine to be able to drive shafts, and likely chain drive to 2 fans on the side. And that's what I mean. That was similar to how the 2J did it. Really doesn't matter where the fans are necessarily. Well, I mean, it matters a lot, but in terms of placement, it's just a coincidence that it's similar. One negative thing though is if it does suck dust and stuff and blow it out the back, that's something. If you put the fans angling more up, you're just going to blow the dust up. So it's something to think of. I may put some deflectors, so if anything comes out, it deflects it downward. But it's going to be really neat to do that. And when it comes time to put the fans on it, I can simply unbolt these big wing fences and the rear wing. So these will be able to hold a lot. This is just actually honeycomb done in glass fiber, plenty strong enough. And I also have carbon fiber I can use if this isn't cutting the mustard. But the wing also has supports here in the middle that will be built off aero tubing structure to the rear of the transaxle. So it'll be supported on the sides, supported in the middle of the transaxle, and then the rear bodywork will sit on a big aluminum truss assembly that you build, because there's a massive amount of force being pushed down as a moment arm. And then of course you got the front. So that's what's going on. I just wanted you guys to see it. Let's take it apart and go to the chassis builder. Building and driving race cars is fun, but it's difficult to source unobtainium parts and get the right engineering expertise. Since 1975, Taylor Race Engineering down in Texas has done just that. So whether you're looking for dog rings and straight cut gears for your road racing car, or you are on a college Formula SAE team and you guys need a chain drive differential and trapeze, this is the place you got to call, guys. Or go to the internet at taylor-race.com. You can see a link in the description below. All right, guys, so that's it for today. Got the car body out of here. Got the Viper engine stored behind the sand rail. And got to take the car to the chassis builder where we're going to get it set up. So next video, you got to come back for that. If you're not subscribed, you have to do so. We got lots of race cars going on. We got the recyclable monocoque high efficiency car. Got my Viper build. Just all kinds of loads of fun stuff coming up. So guys, thanks very much for being here. Come back next week for the next Viper GTP video when we go to the chassis builder. Catch you guys next time. Well, a huge shout out to KW Suspension. Guys, this year you're gonna see beautiful coilovers such as this going on many of my cars, including my Porsche 944, my Dodge Viper, and even some of these crazy race cars. And the reason is simple. This is one of the best shock companies in the world. It was founded in Germany in 1992 by Klaus Wohlfarth, and recently they just launched a new 1.2 million square foot robotic warehouse where they're creating unbelievably nice suspension components such as this for 15 different original equipment manufacturers. So whether you're a street enthusiast, a weekend track warrior, or you are building the Le Mans car of your dreams, guys, check out KW Suspension. Unbelievably nice shocks. So go down in the description below, patronize them. You're going to be glad you did.